Anytime a dungeon master says one of these phrases, it's sure to ruin a session. Let's talk about how to avoid that in your games. Over the years, certain phrases have become synonymous with good DMing within the TTRPG community. Expressions like, "How do you want to do this?" and "You can certainly try," are just a couple that I've seen skyrocket in popularity thanks to shows like Critical Role. I don't really have a problem with most of them, but with the extreme success of these shows and the mass adoption of the hobby, there are some habits being formed in the community that can ruin a session if you aren't careful. So you should know about the one that I have personally used and regretted immediately after I saw my players' joy evaporate on the spot. Are you sure you want to do that? This is definitely going to get some people riled up in the comments, since just about every DM has tried this one on for size before. It's actually touted as a decent alternative to telling a player no by steering them away from potentially reckless or disruptive courses of action while still adhering to the improvisational spirit of D&D. Without a doubt, this string of words has been used to great effect at many tables, and it usually gets a pretty decent laugh as well. It can be funny to point out a fatal flaw in the party's plans, especially within the right playgroup. I mean, we all know it's still way better than telling a player no outright, the ultimate taboo for any DM, but watch what happened here when I tried it. You see Flora slip into the keyhole as a spider.
I would like to crawl back out and start going up one of their pants legs.
Are you sure you want to do that?
Well, now that you're
I just want to understand what you're trying to do.
Because if they hit you and your hit points drop to 0, you're person again.
And you're just going to be in their pants.
In their pants.
Yeah.
You can do it.
It's cool.
Honestly, it's still painful for me to watch. The second I speak the words into existence, you can see the druid player's expression lose that sense of excitement and wonder they had only moments before. The other players chime in to try to reason through the situation, but the damage is done. Their creative idea, albeit pretty risky, has been shot down completely. In this case, what's the worst that might have happened? Let's say the druid crawled up the guard's leg as a spider and was hit out of wild shape. What then? A combat? A silly interaction? After the game, I was able to talk about it with the player and came to understand that I should have just let them attempt their plan. Luckily, I had the chance to try something else in a similar situation just a bit later.
What if I just dropped wild shape while I was in this lock?
Do you think Flora's bones or the metal door is stronger?
I like the way that you put that.
Yeah.
Notice anything different here? It's actually a little trick I adopted from something that Brennan Lee Mulligan does in his games. It's subtle, but I didn't necessarily imply that what she was attempting to do was wrong. Instead, I posed an evocative question. Do you think Flora's bones or the metal door is stronger? Suddenly, this doesn't feel so judgmental. The player is simply given the information they lacked and they're left to make a decision. What's more, we've retained both the relative humor of the situation and conveyed the inherent risks of their plans at the same time. From there, the player operated within the room that was left for them to adjust their idea and pivot to something else rather than just shutting down and giving up completely. Yes, some of that will come down to how a player reacts to the prompts given to them. But giving a player more agency can seldom be wrong, which is why I also try to avoid posing queries like, who's keeping watch and are you stealthing? The problem with these phrasings is that it seems to imply the players should be doing something that they aren't. And this time, it doesn't just steal enjoyment from the players. Phrases like this often self-sabotage the DM as well. A good dungeon master will let their players steer the session, occasionally interjecting with new characters, locations, and encounters without meta interruptions like, are you traveling to X location next? Or do you close the door before you investigate the rest of the room? My players and I have a general understanding that if something isn't stated, it doesn't happen. It leaves space for players to make mistakes, which we've already learned can be a huge improvement to games on its own. But it also allows sessions to break free of the mundanity of perfectly optimal play. To clarify, there's nothing wrong with being perfectly optimal as a player. Just the same, there's nothing wrong with playing suboptimally either. I would argue that the most fun I've had in D&D has come from traps that I've overlooked or NPCs that got the better of me. I can fondly recall one of my first experiences as a player wherein my party and I arrived at the entry to a dragon's den and proceeded to discuss out loud our entire plan for tricking the dragon into letting its guard down. Naturally, the dragon heard everything from the other side of the door, and the combat was a lot more challenging as a result. Our DM at the time never stopped to ask, "Are you whispering this? Or are you speaking out of character?" Instead, they just let us dig our own graves and we welcomed the challenge. Granted, every table is different, but at the very least, DMs and players should operate on some mutual understanding of these situations so that asking these kinds of questions becomes pretty much unnecessary. And I still don't know if this circumstance was something our DM had accounted for at the time. They never told us. A wise choice that I didn't come to understand until much later when I first started DMing and I told my players what was supposed to happen. I'm embarrassed to even admit that I've done this before, but it's hard to deny the temptation that DMs feel to overshare after a session is finished. After all, what was planned for the players was so much cooler than what actually happened, right? Nope. No matter how strong the urge is to explain what you thought might have gone differently in a session, don't do it. Just take a deep breath and hit the like button instead. Nothing will dishearten players faster than a DM telling them that they did the wrong thing, or that what they did do was completely improvised with no real substance whatsoever. A dungeon master may be the adjudicator of the rules. They may even control the events of the larger world that you play within. But they are not the god of the story. The whole group is there to play, experience, and participate in the writing of the adventure. The one and only time that I made this mistake, I was immediately filled with regret at the sight of my players becoming disenchanted with the last 3 hours of roleplay. The truth is that some things are better left unknown, unsaid, and unseen. But there is a famous DM out there that would have you believe otherwise. Now, before I reveal who that DM is, I want to make it known that I have all the respect in the world for them and any other DM that I might happen to disagree with. Every table is different, and the way one person runs their sessions is entirely up to them. You might even disagree with me, and that's okay, because this is a pretty hot take. I am convinced beyond the shadow of a doubt that Abria Iyengar's technique for generating player interest is more disruptive and anticlimactic than anything else for most playgroups. You'll often hear Abria say, "What you don't see is," and then suddenly the players know that there's something that they've missed out on. And while Abria's players often ignore this information and resist the temptation of metagaming, I can't imagine things going that well at your table. At best, this phrase shares a bit of extra lore and foreshadowing with your players, and at worst, it encourages players to make a frenzy of perception and investigation checks looking for something that they shouldn't even know about in an experience that feels very much on the rails. The risks outweigh the potential rewards here by miles. Even in the event that your players are trained actors like many of Abria's players, I find that this approach doesn't instill the same exciting sense of discovery as it would if one were to organically happen upon the same information. The better approach would be to leave clues for the characters, even if they fail to notice the elephant in the room. Not every failed check has to be a critical failure. For example, if a player fails their perception check to notice someone spying on them from a rooftop overhead, maybe they don't get to see the individual in question, but some debris might fall on them from that area, indicating that someone or something might have scurried away from there recently. Or that character might not notice that an evil butler has slipped some poison into someone's drink, but they may pick up on that same partygoer slurring their words after just a few sips. I've actually used that one myself before. Really, there are innumerable ways to get information in front of players organically without this weird meta approach that really only seems to benefit from a live audience. In that sense, Abria is probably doing what's right for her DMing experience. However, there is one phrase I've heard from just about every DM that rarely has a place at any table, live stream or not. Imagine facing down a gruesome beast. The barbarian's axe gripped tightly in their meaty palms. Their heart beats faster as they charge in, wide-eyed and ready as the dungeon master describes the scene. The monster roars as spittle flies from their open maw, full of serrated teeth, striking a nearly paralyzing fear into the heart of the character. Except that the DM shouldn't be deciding how the barbarian feels. The player knows better. They know their character has longed for the thrill of this battle ever since hearing of this creature's existence from the legendary whatever. It can be so easy to tell a player how their character feels in an effort to invoke the emotion the DM envisions for this encounter. But that's not the dungeon master's job, and it's lazy. Because who doesn't love being told how they feel about something? Good DMs describe emotion, but great DMs create emotion. They don't just say out loud what a character is feeling, they describe the situation in such a way that it communicates that emotion. Don't get me wrong, I'm guilty of this forced soliloquy from time to time as well, but I'm conscious of it, and I do try to avoid it. There are so many avenues for building emotional moments within sessions, whether it's achieved with good plot devices or silly voices. I fervently believe that everyone is capable of this, if you have great world building that your players can immerse themselves in, like in this video, which you would have already seen if you were subscribed to the channel. Now, go out there and make some chaos.